The night sky of the alien world burned with fire as Daniel's small ship tore through the clouds. Warning alarms screamed inside the cockpit. Red lights flashing and the control panels sparking with electricity. He gritted his teeth, trying to steady the ship, but the asteroid debris had already torn through the left wing. The engines were failing, the ship's nose dipping sharply toward the thick jungle below. "Come on, hold together," he muttered, pulling the controls. But the ship didn't listen. The last thing he saw before impact was a streak of silver light across the horizon like a falling star. Then the world went white. The crash hit him. Like a fist to the chest, metal screamed and twisted as the ship plowed into the ground. Tearing through trees and soil, Daniel's head slammed against the seat. And for a moment he couldn't breathe. Smoke filled the cockpit. And sparks rained down. His ears rang, but he forced himself to move. He unbuckled and stumbled toward the cracked hatch. The air outside was thick and heavy, carrying strange scents of wet earth and something faintly sweet. The jungle stretched endlessly. Shadows moving in the thick mist. Every sound was sharp leaves rustling, distant growls, and a low hum from somewhere unseen. He dragged himself back inside to grab supplies, a survival pack, a water canister, and his sidearm. As he stepped out again, his boots sank into the soft mud. He took a breath, trying to steady his shaking hands. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the jungle, soft, broken. A weak cry. It wasn't an animal's growl. It was a voice. Daniel froze, scanning the trees. There, just beyond the edge of the wreckage, a shape moved. He approached slowly, keeping his weapon ready. As the mist parted, he saw her. She was lying half hidden among the roots of a massive tree. Her skin was a pale silver blue. Her hair dark and tangled. Her clothes were torn, her breathing shallow. Golden eyes fluttered open and locked on his face, even in the dim light. He could see the fear and pain in them. Her lips moved, forming words he didn't understand. Daniel crouched beside her. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, though he knew she couldn't understand him when he touched her arm. It was ice cold. His survival scanner beeped urgently. Blood loss severe. His heart pounded. He didn't know her species. But the scanner flashed something unexpected: possible blood compatibility. Daniel hesitated. Giving blood to an alien could be dangerous for both of them. But she was dying, and without help, she wouldn't last minutes. He unclipped the small emergency transfusion kit from his pack. As he set it up, she weakly grabbed his wrist. Her touch was surprisingly gentle. Her eyes searched his face, as if asking a silent question. He nodded once. "We'll try," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He connected the line. From his arm to hers, a faint warmth began to pass between them. She inhaled sharply, her eyes widening for a moment, then closing again. The minutes stretched. Daniel felt his strength slowly draining. But he kept the flow going. Color began to return to her cheeks, and her breathing steadied when the scanner beeped in green. He pulled the needle out and sealed the wounds. She opened her eyes again, looking at him differently this time. Her lips moved, and though he still didn't understand the words, her tone was clear gratitude. She reached out, fingers brushing over his hand in a way that felt deliberate. Then her hand slipped away as exhaustion pulled her back into unconsciousness. Daniel leaned back, dizzy from the blood loss. He took a deep breath and scanned the jungle again. The mist swirled and shadows seemed to shift in the distance. He didn't like it. He gathered her in his arms. She was lighter than she looked. Tan carried her toward the wreckage. Inside, he laid her on a padded supply crate. The storm outside began to grow. Thunder rumbling through the ground, lightning flashed, casting her features in sharp relief. She looked fragile now, but there was something about her that felt unbreakable. Daniel sat near her, his hand resting on his blaster. He didn't know who she was, or what she was running from, But he knew one thing: he had just tied his fate to hers. Outside, in the shadows beyond the wreck, something moved. It was big. The glowing red eyes appeared first, followed by a low, guttural growl. Daniel's grip on his weapon tightened. Whatever it was, it had caught their scent, and it was coming closer. Asterisk. The storm raged outside, rain hammering against the wreckage. Daniel sat in the dim light of his emergency lantern, keeping his eyes on the unconscious alien woman. Her breathing had steadied after the blood transfusion, but she still looked. Fragile lightning flashed again, and for a moment, Daniel thought he saw movement in the trees. The memory of those glowing red eyes from earlier sent a chill down his spine. He checked the charge on his blaster was half full. Enough for a fight, but not for a long one. The woman stirred, her golden eyes fluttering open. She looked around, confused. Then her gaze fell on him. Her lips moved, forming words in her language. And though he couldn't understand them, her tone was cautious. Daniel raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm Daniel," he said. Pointing to himself, she blinked, then pointed weakly to her own chest. "Sci-Fi." The name felt strange on his tongue when he repeated it, but she gave a faint nod. She tried to sit up, but he gently pushed her back down. "You're hurt. You need rest," he said, knowing she wouldn't understand the words, but hoping she'd understand the tone. The AI wristband on his arm beeped softly. He tapped the screen and frowned. Her vitals were stabilizing, but there was something unusual. Her heart rate was faster than before, and her cells showed strange energy spikes. The AI voice was calm, but direct, warning foreign body adapting to donor blood at rapid rate. Potential unknown side effects, Daniel muttered under his breath. "Great. So my blood might be doing something we didn't plan for." Solari's golden eyes glowed faintly in the shadows. She shifted uncomfortably, a shiver running through her body. Daniel noticed faint lines of light tracing along the veins in her arms. He reached for the scanner again, but she suddenly grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. Her grip was warm now, not cold like before. She stared into his eyes for a long moment before letting go. It was as if she was silently telling him whatever was happening to her, it was not something she feared. The wind outside howled, but a deeper sound rose beneath it, a distant roar. Sillari's eyes widened, and she began speaking quickly, her voice urgent. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear enough. Danger was coming, and they couldn't stay here. She pointed toward the jungle, then to herself, then to him, as if saying, "We leave now." Daniel hesitated, glancing at the storm out there. "In this weather?" he asked, but she was already trying to stand. He sighed and grabbed his pack. If she thought something was worse than the storm, he'd believe her. They stepped out into the rain, the wind pushing hard against them. The jungle floor was slick with mud, each step heavy. Sci moved with surprising speed for someone who had nearly died hours ago. Daniel had to push himself to keep up. Every now and then, she would glance over her shoulder to make sure he was following. Her hair clung to her face, the water running down her silver-blue skin. Lightning flashed again, and Daniel caught sight of something moving through the trees, large, fast, and keeping pace with them. Sci noticed too, her jaw tightening. They pushed deeper into the jungle until they reached a cluster of massive roots, forming a natural shelter. She motioned for him to get down and stay quiet. They crouched. In the shadows, rain dripping from above, Daniel could hear his own heartbeat. And then footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. A shape emerged through the rain. It was massive, covered in dark armored scales, its 6 legs moving with eerie precision, its head turned, nostrils flaring as it sniffed the air. Daniel held his breath, his finger resting on the blaster's trigger. Sci stayed perfectly still, her golden eyes fixed on the creature. Then, Almost without thinking, she let out a low sound, a growl that seemed too deep for her size. The creature froze, turning its head toward their hiding spot. Sci's glow brightened faintly, her body tensing like a predator ready to strike. Daniel realized she wasn't just scared, she was challenging it. The beast's lips curled back, revealing rows of sharp, wet teeth. It stepped closer, and Daniel knew hiding was over. He raised the blaster. But Sci suddenly pushed his arm down. She shook her head once, firmly, then she stepped out from the roots. Rain pouring over her, Daniel's instincts screamed to stop her, but something about the way she moved made him freeze. She stood tall in front of the beast, her glowing veins visible even through the rain. Her voice rang out, sharp and fierce, carrying words Daniel didn't understand but felt deep in his bones. The creature hesitated, head lowering slightly. As if confused, Daniel could hardly believe the monster was backing away. After a tense moment, it turned and melted back into the jungle, disappearing into the rain. Sci's shoulders sagged, and she stumbled. Daniel rushed forward and caught her before she fell. Her breathing was fast, her body trembling, up close. He could feel the heat radiating from her skin was almost too warm. He didn't know what his blood had done to her. But he was starting to realize it had made her something more. They made their way back under the shelter of a large overhanging tree. Sci leaned against him, her golden eyes dimming but still locked on his face. For the first time, Daniel thought he saw something in them that wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, something he couldn't yet name. The rain kept falling, but Daniel knew the real storm was only beginning. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the jungle steaming in the early light. Daniel opened his eyes to find Sci already awake, crouched near the edge of the clearing. She moved with quiet focus, scanning the trees as if expecting something to appear. Her golden eyes caught the sunlight, and for a moment they seemed almost brighter than the night before. Daniel rubbed his tired eyes and sat up. "You didn't sleep," he said softly. Though he knew she wouldn't understand, she shook her head and tapped her ear, then pointed toward the forest. That was when he heard it low, distant clicks and growls. Faint but growing closer, Sci stood and motioned for him to get ready. She tapped her nose, then his arm, then her own chest. Daniel didn't need a translation. She was saying the creature's scent was now mixed with theirs. That meant the predators could track both of them. He strapped on his pack and checked his blaster. "All right, lead the way," he muttered. She gave a short nod and started moving fast, weaving through the undergrowth like she had walked these paths all her life. The jungle was alive with soundbirds with metallic cries, insects that glowed as they flew, and plants that twitched when brushed. Daniel's boots sank into the damp soil, every step sending up the smell of wet leaves. Despite the beauty, there was no comfort here. Every rustle could be a predator, every shadow a trap. He kept glancing at Sci, noticing how she seemed to sense danger before it happened. Once, she held up a hand and stopped so suddenly that he nearly bumped into her. She pointed to a vine hanging low over the path. It looked harmless until it moved, curling slowly toward them like a snake. They backed away, giving it space. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher. The air grew heavy and thick, and Daniel's breath came in slow pulls. He could feel the fatigue from the blood loss still lingering in his body. But Sci seemed stronger than ever. Her movements were sharper, her steps faster. It was strange. Just yesterday she could barely lift her head. Now she was moving like a trained warrior. Daniel couldn't help but wonder how much of that was her, and how much was his blood. They reached a ridge that overlooked a dark stretch of jungle below. Sci crouched, scanning the shadows. Daniel followed her gaze and saw it movement. 3 large shapes slipping between the trees, too far too. See clearly, but close enough to feel the threat. Solari's jaw tightened, and she spoke in a low voice. Even without words, Daniel understood Korath. The same kind of creature they had seen last night, but more of them. She tapped her own chest and then drew a line across her throat. She didn't need to explain if the Korath caught them. There would be no escape. They moved down the ridge, sticking to the shadows. The sounds of the Korath grew louder. There, claws scratching against roots and stone. Suddenly, one of the beasts appeared ahead. Blocking the path, its head turned toward them, nostrils flaring. Daniel raised his blaster, but before he could fire, Solari stepped in front of him. Her body tensed, her golden eyes blazing. She let out a sharp, fierce cry that echoed through the trees. The creature hesitated, just like the one last night. Then it lunged. Daniel fired, the shot burning into its side. The Korath roared in pain. But Solari was already moving. She leaped forward, faster than any human could. Her claws that hadn't been there before slashing across the beast's face. The Korath staggered, its blood spraying across the leaves. Daniel fired again, and this time the creature fell. The forest went silent for a moment, except for the sound of their breathing. Solari stood over the fallen predator, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her eyes met Daniel's, and for a moment neither spoke. Then she turned sharply. Scanning the forest again, more roars echoed in the distance. Closer now, they didn't have time to rest. Daniel reloaded his blaster as Solari motioned for him. To follow, they moved quickly, weaving through thick roots and leaping over fallen trees. At one point, Daniel stumbled, his leg catching on a vine. Solari was instantly at his side. Pulling him up with surprising ease, her hand lingered on his arm for just a heartbeat longer than needed. Daniel didn't know if it was because she was making sure he could keep going, or something else entirely. By late afternoon, they found a narrow stream cutting through the forest. Solari knelt and drank, then dipped her fingers into the water and drew a small symbol on the ground. Daniel didn't understand it, but it felt like a warning sign when he crouched beside her. She pointed upstream in the distance. Hidden by mist, he could see the jagged outline of mountains. She tapped the mountains, then her chest, then his. "That's where we go," Daniel gave. A small nod. If the Korath were hunting them, higher ground might give them a chance. They followed the stream as the sun began to set. The sky turned a deep red, shadows stretching long and sharp. Somewhere behind them, the jungle went quiet. Daniel's stomach sank. Silence in a place like this was never a good sign. Solari's hand brushed against his arm, gentle but firm. She met his gaze, her golden eyes steady. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. The hunt had begun and they were the prey. The jungle night was alive again, but this time it was not with harmless sounds. It was the rhythm of claws striking the earth, branches snapping, and low growls circling from every direction. Daniel and Solari stood back to back in the dim moonlight filtering through the trees. The stream they had been following shimmered under the pale glow. Oh, but its beauty was lost under the tension pressing in. Solari's head tilted slightly, her sharp ears catching movements Daniel couldn't hear yet. Her golden eyes were narrow, glowing faintly, reflecting the light like a predator's. The first Korath appeared from the darkness. Its massive form slid between the trees, the light catching the slick, armored scales across its back. It opened, its jaws, rows of wet fangs glistening. Daniel raised his blaster without hesitation, but before he could fire, two more emerged from the other side. They were surrounded. Solari didn't step back. Instead, she took one slow step forward, her claws extending from her fingers like curved blades of light. Daniel's eyes widened. He hadn't seen them in daylight before. They pulsed faintly with a strange energy. The largest Korath lunged first. Daniel fired, hitting its side, but it didn't fall. Solari leaped forward, meeting it mid-strike. Her claws tore into its armor, sparks of light bursting from the wounds. Daniel moved to cover her, blasting. At the second beast, trying to circle behind, the third came from the side, forcing him to roll into the mud as its claws swiped past his head. He fired upward, hitting its jaw and sending it stumbling back. The sound of Solari's roar cut through the chaos. It was fierce, primal, nothing like the quiet woman he had first found. The fight was fast, brutal, and loud. Daniel's blaster shots burned holes into the predator's hides while Solari's strikes cut deep and clean. One of the beasts crashed into a tree, shaking the ground. Another tried to leap onto Daniel. But Solari was there, pulling it down with strength no normal person could have. She moved like she had been born for battle. And yet, every time she struck, she kept herself between Daniel and danger. It was as if his safety mattered more than her own. The last Korath let out a sharp screech and bolted back into the darkness. The others followed, limping and wounded. The forest fell silent again, except for their heavy breathing. Daniel stood still for a moment, his chest rising and falling quickly. Solari turned to face him, her glowing claws slowly retracting. Her expression was unreadable at first, then softened. She stepped closer, placing her hand lightly over his heart. Daniel blinked at the sudden closeness. She spoke softly in her language, her tone warm. He didn't know the exact meaning, but he could feel it was not just thanks. It was something deeper, a kind of connection he couldn't explain. They found shelter in a hollow space under a large tree root. The rain had returned, falling in a steady rhythm outside. Daniel cleaned his blaster while Solari tended to a small cut on her arm. The wound closed quickly under his watchful eyes. He couldn't ignore it anymore. "My blood did this to you, didn't it?" he asked quietly. She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded once. She drew a small circle on her own chest, then reached forward and drew the same circle on his. It was a symbol of bond. She then mimed two hands locking together. Daniel understood his blood had tied them. Hours passed, but neither truly rested. The jungle around them shifted with every sound. Daniel tried to keep his mind on survival, but he couldn't stop thinking about what she had said without words. In her culture, blood sharing wasn't just medicine, was a sacred bond, stronger than family, stronger than marriage. He had given her life, and now she had bound hers to his. The weight of it pressed on him, but not in a way he disliked. In fact, the thought brought him a strange sense of certainty. It had been a long time since he had felt like someone's life and his were tied together. As dawn broke, they packed up to move again. The fight from last night had surely left a trail of blood and sent for other predators to follow. Solari walked ahead, scanning the path, but this time her movements were slower. Daniel noticed her glancing back at him more often than before. Once, their eyes met and held for a second too long. It wasn't fear in her gaze, it was something softer, but also fierce, a silent promise that if danger came again, she would stand in its way, no matter the cost. They crossed a narrow path between two cliffs. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, a green ocean broken by rivers of silver light. Daniel paused to take it in. "This planet is beautiful and deadly," he murmured. Solari stopped too. Standing beside him, she said something in her language. Her voice calm. He didn't know the words, but the way she looked at him made him think she was talking about more than just the view. As they moved on, Daniel felt the bond between them strengthening. They had fought together, bled together, survived together. Whatever lay ahead, they were no longer just two strangers running from danger. They were becoming something else, something unbreakable. And deep in his gut, Daniel knew that the real battle had only just begun. The mountains loomed larger with every step, jagged peaks cutting into the sky like teeth. Daniel followed Salari along a narrow trail. The ground wet and slick beneath their boots. The air grew thinner here, cooler, and the dense jungle gave way to tall stone walls and clusters of strange red plants that swayed without wind. It was quiet, almost too quiet, and Daniel didn't trust it. He kept his hand close to his blaster, watching the shadows for movement. Salari stopped suddenly, holding up her hand. Daniel froze, scanning the area. That was when he saw them three figures stepping out from behind the rocks. They were tall, armored in dark silver plates, with the same silver-blue skin as Salari. Their helmets were marked with sharp symbols, glowing faintly in the dim light. Salari's body stiffened, her golden eyes narrowing. She said something in her language, her voice sharp and commanding. One of the armored figures stepped forward, lowering his helmet to reveal a hard, expressionless face. He looked at Salari for a long moment, then spoke in a low, almost dangerous tone. Daniel didn't understand the words, but the tension between them was clear. Salari's jaw clenched, her hand resting near her side as if ready for a fight. The man's eyes flicked to Daniel. Lingering with open suspicion, another figure. A woman whispered something to him, and he smirked. Daniel didn't need a translator to know they were talking about him. Salari's voice rose, her words sharp now. The leader's smirk faded, replaced by a cold glare. Then, without warning, he reached for the weapon at his side, Daniel's. Blaster was in his hand before he even thought about it, but Salari moved faster. Stepping between them, her claws sliding out with a faint glow. She barked a command that made the soldiers hesitate. For a moment, no one moved. The mountain. Wind whistling between them. Then the leader said something short, clipped, and cold. Salari's shoulders dropped slightly, but her expression stayed hard. The soldiers backed away a few steps, but their eyes never left Daniel. When they were out of sight, Daniel turned. To her, "I'm guessing those are your people," he said quietly. She nodded once, her eyes still fixed on the direction they had gone. She tapped her chest, then made a slicing motion across her throat. Daniel frowned. "They thought you were dead." She nodded again, then pointed to the mountains, then back to herself through her gestures. He pieced it together. Her clan had left her behind, believing she would be killed by the Korath. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a choice, a betrayal. They continued upward, the path narrowing until they had to walk single file. Salari moved quickly, but Daniel could tell she was tense. Her people had seen her alive, and that could mean trouble. He didn't know much about her culture, but he knew enough from her body language to guess that returning with a human, especially one who had given her blood, was not something they would welcome. They found a cave halfway up the cliffside and decided to stop for the night, inside. The air was dry and cool, the walls glittering faintly with embedded crystals. Daniel set down his pack and started a small heat source. Salari sat across from him, her golden eyes catching the firelight. For a long time, she didn't speak, only stared at the flames. Finally, she began to speak softly in her language. Daniel couldn't understand the words, but her tone carried weights, sorrow, anger, and something deeper. She touched her chest, then his arm, then gestured to the bond mark she had drawn before. He understood she was saying that the connection they shared was not just important to her. It was dangerous. He leaned back. "So your people, they wouldn't like this." She shook her head slowly, then mimed someone being struck down. Daniel sighed. "Yeah, I figured." She moved closer, her gaze locked on his. Her voice was quiet now, almost like a whisper. Even without knowing the words, Daniel felt the meaning. She would not let them harm him, no matter the cost. That night, Daniel didn't sleep much. He kept hearing distant sounds outside the cave, soft steps on stone, a faint metallic clink in the early hours before dawn. Salari suddenly sat up, her Head snapping toward the entrance, Daniel grabbed his blaster and moved beside her. In the shadows at the edge of the cliff, he saw them, two of the soldiers from before, watching silently when they realized they had been seen. They stepped back into the darkness, disappearing without a word. Daniel looked at Sailari there. "Tracking us," she nodded once, her claws sliding out again. The message was clear: if her people were coming, she was ready to fight them. Daniel wasn't sure if he was ready to fight her people, but one thing was certain: he wouldn't let her face it alone. Whatever secret she carried, whatever danger they were walking into, he was already too deep to turn back. The mountains ahead were steep and treacherous, but Daniel felt a strange pull toward them. It wasn't just survival anymore, it was something. About the way Sailari looked at him, something unspoken but strong, somewhere in those mountains. The answers waited, and Daniel knew that finding them would change everything for her. For him, and maybe for the entire galaxy. The mountain air was thin and sharp, cutting into Daniel's lungs with every breath. He followed Sailari along a narrow ledge that clung to the cliffside. The drop below disappearing into a sea of mist. The sun was just rising, painting the jagged peaks in shades of gold and crimson. It should have been beautiful. But all Daniel could think about was the shadow of pursuit behind them. Her people were still tracking them. He could feel it in the way Sailari kept glancing over her shoulder. Her body tense. They reached a point where the path split into two. One way wound higher into the mountains. The other descended toward a dark valley. Sailari stopped, her golden eyes scanning both paths. She crouched and drew shapes in the dirt with her claw. Daniel watched as she marked the mountain route with the image of a jagged claw. The valley she marked with a coiled serpent. Then she tapped the claw mark and shook her head. Her meaning was clear. The mountain route was crawling with Korath nests. The valley was safer from predators, but she drew a circle on her chest and then pointed toward the valley her people were. There, Daniel rubbed his temples. So, one path means monsters, the other means people who want us dead. Sailari met his gaze and waited. The decision, it seemed, was his. He stared at both paths, the wind howling through the rocks. Finally, he pointed toward the mountains. "Monsters I can shoot," he said. "Your people." "Not so much." Sailari gave a small, approving nod. They climbed higher. The path growing steeper. Loose stones slid under their feet, threatening to send them over the edge. The air grew colder, and snow clung to the rocks. For hours, they pressed on, speaking little, saving their strength. But Daniel noticed something. Sailari was slowing down. At first, he thought it was fatigue. But then he saw her grip her side as if in pain. "Hey," he said softly. "What's wrong?" She shook her head and tried to wave him off, but her breathing was heavier than before. They stopped in a sheltered alcove to rest. Daniel dug into his pack for water. Handing her the canister, she drank, but her hands trembled slightly. His mind went back to the warnings from his AI. Human blood might cause unpredictable effects. It had made her stronger, faster. But maybe it was also burning her out. He didn't say anything, but the worry gnawed at him. By midday, they reached a narrow pass between two cliffs. It was quiet. Too quiet, Sailari's head lifted. Her eyes scanning the shadows, then came the sound. Low, vibrating growls from all around them. Shapes began to emerge from the rocks, large and hunched, their eyes gleaming in the dim light. Korath, not just one or two, but a whole pack. Daniel's blaster was in his hands instantly. Sailari stepped in front of him, her claws sliding out with a sharp hiss. The pack moved in slowly, confident in their numbers. The first one lunged, and the fight began. Daniel fired at its chest. The blast lighting up the pass, Sailari spun low, slashing at another that tried to flank them. They moved together like they had fought side by side for years. Every time Daniel aimed, she covered his blind spots. Every time she struck, he was ready to follow up, But the pack was relentless, and more shadows moved in from the edges of the cliffs. One of the Koroth leaped from above, slamming into Daniel and knocking him to the ground. His blaster skidded. Out of reach, the beast's claws pinned him down, its teeth snapping inches from his face. Before he could react, Sailari was there. She tackled the creature with a roar, her claws tearing into its throat. But another beast lunged at her back. Daniel scrambled to his blaster and fired, the shot slamming into its side. The smell of burnt flesh filled the cold air. The fight raged on, the narrow pass echoing with snarls, roars, and the crack of Daniel's weapon. At last, the surviving Koroth retreated, their bodies disappearing into the mist. Daniel lowered his blaster, breathing hard. Sailari stood a few feet away, her chest rising and falling quickly, her claws dripping with dark blood. She turned to him, her golden eyes fierce. But then her expression shifted pain. She stumbled forward, catching herself against the rock wall. Daniel rushed to her. "You're hurt." She shook her head, but her legs wavered. Her hand gripped his arm tightly. Her claws retracted. She spoke in her language, her voice urgent but soft. Daniel didn't understand all of it, but he caught one word she had said before life. He realized she wasn't talking about herself. She was talking about him, about keeping him alive no matter the cost. The choice they had made to take the monster's path had saved them from her people, but it had pushed her to the edge. Daniel looked at the snow ahead, the mountains still rising in the distance. They kept going, they might reach safety, or they might both die out here. The decision was no longer just about survival. It was about each other. Sailari gripped his hand and held it tightly, her golden eyes steady despite the exhaustion in her face. Daniel squeezed back, whatever came. Next, they would face it together, and for the first time since the crash. Daniel realized something. This wasn't just about him saving her anymore. It was about her saving him too, in ways he couldn't yet understand. The wind screamed through the narrow pass as Daniel half-carried Sailari up the last stretch of the mountain path. Her weight pressed against him, her steps uneven, but her grip on his arm was iron. The snow crunched under their boots, each step a struggle against the cold and the thin air. Above them, the sky had turned a pale silver, the clouds rolling fast. Daniel's breath came in ragged bursts, but he didn't dare stop. He could feel the heat radiating from hurt to much heat. Whatever his blood had done to her, it was burning inside her now. They reached a ridge that overlooked the other side of the mountains. Daniel's eyes widened. Far below, nestled in a hidden valley, was a ship. Not just any ship, was massive, alien in design, with curved metal like the bones of some great beast. Its surface glimmered faintly under the weak sun. Sailari's golden eyes lit up for the first time in hours. She pointed toward it, her voice soft but urgent. Daniel understood. That ship was their way off this planet. The path down was steep and dangerous. Twice, Daniel nearly lost his footing, and each time, Sailari's grip pulled him back, even weak. She was still strong enough to keep him from falling. By the time they reached the valley floor, the air had warmed slightly. The great ship loomed over them, its hull covered in symbols that glowed faintly as they approached. Daniel reached out and touched the cold metal. It pulsed under his palm, almost like a heartbeat. The entrance hissed open, the sound echoing in the stillness. Inside, the air was warmer, cleaner, and lit by soft blue light. Daniel's eyes darted around, taking in the strange curved corridors. The ship was empty, at least it seemed so. Sailari led him deeper, her steps slow but sure. Finally, they reached a central chamber with a large circular platform. She pressed her hand to a panel, and the platform came alive, glowing beneath them. Daniel glanced around, unease creeping in. Is this safe? He asked. Solaire didn't answer. Instead, she turned to him. Her eyes steady, she stepped closer, lifting her hand to his face. Her fingers were warm. Trembling slightly, she said something in her language, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Daniel didn't need to understand the words, he knew what she meant. She pulled him into a seated position on the platform and pressed her palm over his chest. Daniel felt a sudden rush of warmth, not just against his skin, but deep inside. His vision blurred, colors shifting and twisting. It was like his body was being filled with light. The pain in his muscles faded. His breathing steadied, and the heavy fatigue vanished. When the glow dimmed, he realized what she had done. She had given him something back, something more than healing, part of her life force, the same way he had once given her part of his. Daniel stared at her in shock. That's dangerous, isn't it? For you? She smiled faintly, shaking her head. Then she tapped his chest, then her own. 2 lives, 1 bond. It was no longer just his blood in her. It was her essence in him. Before he could respond, the ship shuddered. The control panels lit up, displaying streams of alien symbols. Solaire moved to the console, her hands gliding over the controls with practiced ease. Daniel realized this ship wasn't abandoned, had been waiting. A deep hum filled the chamber. As the engines came to life through the viewing screen, the valley began to shrink. The mountains falling away beneath them. But then, the alert sounded on the display. Daniel saw movement, small craft rising from the far side of the mountains. Her people, they were coming fast. Their ships armed. Daniel's hand went to his blaster out of instinct, though it would be useless here. Solaire looked at the screen, then at him. Her expression hardened. She entered a rapid series of commands, and the ship surged upward. Breaking through the last clouds into open sky, the enemy ships fired. But Solaire's vessel twisted and turned with impossible precision. Daniel held onto the edge of the console. As they shot toward space, stars appeared above them, the blackness of the void swallowing the light of the planet. A moment later, the ship's nose tilted forward, and a tunnel of swirling blue light opened ahead. Daniel realized they were about to jump to hyperspace. The enemy fire grew weaker, fading as the ship shot forward into the tunnel of light. Silence settled inside the cabin. Daniel sank into the nearest seat, his heart still racing. Solaire moved to sit beside him, her golden eyes softer now. She reached out and took his hand without hesitation. Daniel felt the warmth of her touch, the steady pulse beneath her skin. He squeezed her hand gently. "You saved me," he said quietly. She tilted her head, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then she nodded. But Daniel knew it wasn't just about saving his life. It was about making sure neither of them ever faced the galaxy alone again. The stars outside shifted as the ship settled into hyperspace. Daniel leaned back, attention slowly leaving his body. Solaire rested her head lightly against his shoulder. They didn't need words, not now. They both knew what had happened. Between them was more than survival. It was a bond forged in blood, battle, and choice. And whatever waited at the other end of this journey, they would face it together.